시작!
96 Flag Rally. This is gonna be a weird one. See, I found this game on my Pandora's box. It was an arcade game that I had never heard of, and taking a quick look at the preview, it looked like one of those games that was like, just sort of like a bad pirate knockoff of another game, released in a place that didn't want to pay for the license or couldn't, so they just decided to improve it? In quotes. And its improvements are at best like nebulous and at worst just outright downgrades. This game was seemingly only released in Korea, hence why everything is in Hangul, and that was also a great tip that this probably wasn't going to be quite on the level. I'm sure this is probably a pirate knockoff based around RallyX, Namco's classic game about driving around a maze, avoiding crashing into things and collecting stuff. And this game is very much the same. If I were to try and summarize all of 96 Flag Rally in one word, it would be consistency. Or more accurately, entirely a lack thereof. The first thing you notice about this game is that it just bombards you with random anime girls left, right, and center. None of which look consistent and have like completely different art styles, and that's because they've been grabbed from completely different games. I've recognized at least 3 Tokimeki girls in here. I believe the game over screen features Cotton for some reason. And like, just the art style is completely different for all these characters. Some have really chunky pixels and like a dithering effect to create like a multitude of colors. Others have a relatively nice shading effect. But this is kind of the start of what you will recognize about this game, and that is basically everything about this game visually has been taken from something else. I think with maybe the exception of the individual roads you drive on and the sprites of your vehicles, but even that's not technically accurate because the actual pictures of the vehicles you select on the select screen, I'm pretty sure are also taken from somewhere. Also, there's just straight up ads from things also stolen, so Energizer, get on this shit. Once you start the game, you have the option of selecting your vehicle. This is entirely cosmetic. Now, for what it's worth, your vehicle does actually change what vehicle you drive. You can drive as a motorist, who you can see their little ponytail flapping in the wind behind you, which is a nice touch. You can pick this vehicle that looks like it has 3 wheels but is a 4-wheel car, or you can pick a yellow 4-wheel car. They all play exactly identically. Then you get to pick whichever anime girl you want, and I guess this is supposed to be the driver or something. Although, you know, you can see the hair of the motorcyclist, so that's not them. And this decision actually changes literally nothing because I played using multiple girls, nothing changed. So this selection changes absolutely nothing. Not sure why this is here. I guess it's to make you think there's a little more depth than there actually is. Once you get into the game, it's pretty simple. You're in a maze, there's other enemy cars, avoid them, collect all the flags, including the bonus flags, because the bonuses need to be picked up in order to clear the game, and don't crash. You do have to manage a fuel system, which if that runs out, you will die instantly, and you can also expend that fuel faster in order to get speed boost, or, well, it's a smoke screen, but it behaves like an oil slick behind you to stop enemy vehicles. Other than that, it's just a matter of not dying and collecting things, but everything about this just feels very off. Like, nothing about this is consistent, or it's just barely functional enough that someone could maybe sell this game and it would be maybe entertaining for a few minutes. Let me give you an example. So, enemy AI. I can't prove it, but I think the AI kind of acts variably, but in the inverse of a way that would actually be interesting. When you start on level 1, you have 1 opponent, and it's very, very easy to play, obviously. By the time you get to level 30, you're going up against, I think, like 6 opponents, but they're tuned to be far more aggressive. So not only are you dealing with more enemies, but they're harder to deal with. I think had they flipped that, it might have been more interesting. You know, you have less opponents, but they behave smarter. You have more opponents, you have to just sort of avoid the giant mass. That would have made a lot more sense and would have been a lot more interesting way to approach levels. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's just the more enemies you see, the more frustrating they are to deal with. And they have unlimited fuel, and they can just speed boost whenever, which is great. When they kill you, and they will kill you, because by the end of it, you'll be lucky if a life lasts you more than 15 seconds, you respawn where you died. You still have to collect the remaining flags, but you've got a head start, effectively. Except not always, because for some reason, sometimes it just respawns you back at the start surrounded by enemies. Because that's fair. What's particularly great about this is all the enemies spawn in the exact fixed location at the start of the match, and you can see them on the map, but when they actually have an active hitbox is a little bit nebulous. If you happen to do a cheeky little drive-by in order to collect a collectible near where a spawn is, you might just die right under where an enemy spawns, and the game will respawn you right under that enemy. Now granted, they still have their invulnerability frames for a few seconds, but it's just really weird, and it just isn't good. Like, I can't imagine a game that just says, okay, an enemy spawns here, you die at spawn, congratulations, you get to spawn underneath them, right where all the danger is. It just doesn't make sense. Actually, if you want to talk about weird inconsistencies with stuff, when you game over, you have to insert a coin and start again, and then the board resets. That's not too bad, but when you unlock a bonus stage, if you die there, and you will die there because it spawns like giant hazards right in front of you, sometimes at intersections that you can't avoid or see into, then for some reason you have to continue, even though it's a bonus stage and that death shouldn't count because that's just for extra points and not actually progression. But nope, this game is really greedy like that. That's not where the weird inconsistencies of stuff actually ends with gaming over, because it gets weirder and worse. Because you might notice at this point that I have several credits in the lower right hand corner. I get a game over, I should just be able to, you know, continue with that credit. Not so. For some reason, this game will track continues that you have stocked in advance, but unless you expend a credit while it's on the game over screen, it doesn't actually accept it. So it will track how much money you've pumped into this machine, but unless you actually pump money in exactly at a game over, it doesn't count. That is just mind-boggling. Like, I genuinely don't think I've ever seen an arcade game do that before. It is incredibly greedy and just really awkwardly badly programmed. Unless that's intentional, in which case, yeah, unbelievably greedy. Oh, but let's talk about the game overs for a sec. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this game should not be played by photosensitive people. I got massive headaches playing this game, and I'm gonna cut around all of that, so don't worry about it. But when you die, and you will die, you get presented with this screen. Yeah, there's no explanation as to what this is or why this is, but it's a complete 180 in tone from the really bright, cheery driving game you were playing a second ago. Suddenly you're just some random anime girl, once again, not actually corresponding to the anime girl you selected, covered in blood and looking like she wants to avenge her fallen sister or something. Again, this was likely ripped from a different game entirely, so who knows. But it's just, this is the thing that makes this game interesting, because otherwise it's basically a bad pirate knockoff of Rallycross. Suddenly, it's a bad pirate knockoff of Rallycross that has blood and like gore, and suddenly it becomes like an adult game, you know, relative to when this was made anyway. It's just bizarre, and it's genuinely the most interesting thing about this game, because otherwise it's basically just bad Rallycross. Once you manage to collect all the flags, good luck. You will then suddenly turn all the enemies into gems of many different colors. Gem color doesn't actually seem to indicate anything, as every gem gives you 1,000 points, but you then have a few seconds to collect them, all while being berated by more anime girls, as you were during the actual main game, because they track your gas and they yell at you for, like, fuel economy or some nonsense. Seriously, this game is just covered in random anime girls of varying degrees of quality of their design. Once you complete X number of stages, you get what I assume is supposed to be like some kind of enticing, vaguely maybe softcore scene with them, but it's really just sitting in a full bathing suit, and it's really uninteresting. So yeah, we've got at least 3, maybe 4 different games this game aped visual elements from. And we haven't even talked about the environments, because as we drive around, you might notice the fact that all the background filigree is weirdly isometric. Yeah, that's because they were stolen entirely from city builder games, specifically SimCity 2000, which I believe was 1993, Caesar 2, which I want to say was 95 offhand, and The Settlers 2, which was 96. At least this does date this as a game that could have come out in 96, as opposed to a game that came out in like 2020, and just said 96 for some reason. At least it does seem to have visual elements that do date it to around that general time, which is interesting. But again, it's just weirdly inconsistent because all the background elements are isometric, but you're driving top down. It just creates a weird sense of scale that makes your vehicles look far bigger than they should be relative to all the background objects. Or I guess it makes you feel like you're driving a little Matchbox car around a fake city. But then the bloody girl when you die makes absolutely no sense, so who knows. Speaking of the gameplay to this game, you might notice I'm missing a lot of turns or making really simple mistakes and playing really sloppily here. Yeah, the controls don't really control so much as the controls write a letter to be sent halfway across the world so that it can be received by HR so that it can tell the controls to control whenever it gets a moment, maybe if it wants. There's incredible amounts of just eaten inputs left, right, and center. You might want to turn left, right, whenever. And you can actually like 180 on the spot sometimes, but the game just doesn't read inputs at all. And it's not a problem with my Pandora's box because I've been playing a lot of games with it and the thing works fine. It's just this game does not recognize inputs at all, which is kind of awful for a game that's, you know, an arcade game that requires a lot of precision, especially when your AI is designed really dickishly. So yeah, it's not exactly great. Also, I found this weird, like, pamphlet on the game on, like, a Korean games database. It was, like, one of the few bits of this game I could actually track any documentation down. And I ran it through a translator, and it said that there was 25 levels. But, like, I'm on level 30 right now, so I have no idea what this is on about. But, yeah, this exists. At the end of the day, gameplay-wise, 96 Flag Rally is basically what it looks like. It's a rough knockoff of Rallycross that doesn't play terribly well and is just full of awkward inconsistencies and frustrations. But it is still a version of Rallycross, so at its core, it is kinda good. It's just sorta, you know, bad in pretty much all respects. I would say that this game is maybe interesting for about 5 minutes just to see how weird it is, kind of like why I got into it in the first place, but other than that, it's really not all that special gameplay-wise, and there's better versions of this game out there already, and significantly less frustrating ones at that. The overall presentation to 96 Flag Rally is, well, like everything else, it's a kind of awkward hodgepodge of about a million things stolen from a million places, and none of it's consistent or cohesive. You've got visuals of anime girls of varying artistic styles and places of origin that all look weirdly out of place everywhere, as well as like actual real products being advertised in billboards on the background in a top-down game that has background elements that are isometric, so it's not really top-down or we're driving in a very, very small area. Visually, it's a total mess. But the weird thing is, every single thing about this looks entirely out of place, and yet, in order for something to be out of place, you have to have a baseline place to start to be out of. But literally nothing here is consistent, so in a weird sense, it's all entirely cohesive in the sense that nothing is cohesive. It's just bizarre and all over the place. Audio-wise, there's 3 songs on the soundtrack. 2 very jaunty piano tracks, and 1 with a wailing guitar, which would be great if all the audio in this game wasn't horribly compressed and just really awkward and bad. It sounds terrible, and while the music itself might be kind of good, if you tuned it super, super low, it gets super repetitive very, very quickly. Same with the voices. There's a couple of voice lines in the game, but likewise, they're really low quality, and they're just gonna grate on you. Audio-wise, it's nothing special. This is really a game you look at just to see how awkward it really is, and that's kind of all the enjoyment and the only real good thing about the presentation to this game. Otherwise, it's kind of not great. Other than maybe that your chosen vehicle does actually reflect what you drive. That's kind of a cool feature, but that's about it. At the end of the day, 96 Flag Rally is a complete and total mess, and it's absolutely what it first appears to be. This weird sort of hacked together attempt at a well-established game, but nowhere near as good. It has weird anime girls left, right, and center, including in some, like, vaguely, maybe sort of soft-core imagery just to try and be, I don't know, titillating, but it's all over the place and not remotely sexy or anything. There's nothing here that's really a draw other than just to kind of look and point at just how strange it is. This game definitely feels like a pirate knockoff made for a chunk of the world that couldn't get the original Rallycross, but they wanted to make sure that they had some version of it to play, and by that regard, it's obnoxious, but it is kind of fun for about 2 minutes. But its bizarre systems of greed not letting you continue with credits to your name, the fact that enemies ramp up as you play, but like not consistently, and they can just speed up whenever and have no need to modify their fuel economy like you do, it puts you at a serious disadvantage, and it feels just hard and cheap for no real reason. And cheap is a great word because this entire game feels like a cheap knockoff of something that was actually kinda good. I'm not the biggest Rallycross fan ever, but you know, it at least had a consistent look and quality, but this is just kinda all over the place and strange. And I think that is all the more reason people need to see it and play it and hear about it, because this game is truly strange. And I think it is one of those cases of this was a game made for a chunk of the world that probably didn't get the base things, so they made their own. And it's not great, but it's indicative of the chunk of the world and like the game industry as a whole where this came from. And that is, if nothing else, very, very interesting. I love crap like this. It's not great as a game, but it's interesting as something to look at and take note of and acknowledge it exists, because it is an important part of the history of the games industry. If only as a weird footnote from a chunk of the world that had to make their own knockoff version just to get any version of it, you know? And that's important to document. And I guess that's why I wanted to talk about this game today. I saw a weird thing, I wanted people to know about it.
계속할래요? 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 미워.